A picture is worth 1,000 words. Got it? Taking care of us can be so easy.
Take good care of the children.
Welcome back. We continue our panel discussion on the Roving Caregivers Program, and we're learning that it is very well documented that early childhood development, the impact of education at that early stage, has long-range social and economic benefits to all nations. As a matter of fact, the documentation coming out of the impact study on the program show that in the long run, early childhood stimulation impacts the dropout rate at high school. It impacts the crime engagement levels. It impacts the use of illegal drugs in a positive way. It impacts the way new parents are able to parent their children. And it cuts down on the amount of neglect and abuse that young children experience from their parents. We want to therefore focus now on the cost-benefit factor of this process. And Susan, what is exciting about it is that it is not very costly. Can you explain so we really get that?
Indeed, it isn't an expensive program to implement and certainly to take to scale. We recently got some very preliminary findings back from our research team, and what it suggests by way of cost is for Jamaica, which is a well-established program, as you would be aware, it's $59 per child per year.
No.
To be involved in the Roving Caregivers Program.
Say that again. Because
$59 US per
Yes.
child per year.
Yes.
And this is working with a group of 1,500 children here in Jamaica.
So let's say that's 5,000 Jamaican dollars approximately.
Yes, yes. And even more exciting is that they have suggested that the more you take it to scale or increase the numbers, the lower the costs become, because the overhead costs remain the same. So what that is saying in effect is, take it to scale. It becomes even more cost effective. And that doesn't even touch on the benefits that we spoke about in the last segment of the program in terms of the ripple effect that it has on so many other players. But this is about the cost that is
Well, you know, I literally had to consciously close my mouth a while ago because, you know, those figures are absolutely stupendous.
Yes,
Absolutely stupendous. I want to welcome Jennifer Astafan as the Executive Director of the Caribbean Center for Development Administration, and you have that acronym CARICAD. So, Madame, if you are partly responsible directing development administration in the region, how do you intend to ensure that such a program as this does, in fact, filter through the region?
Well, if I can backtrack a little bit, there was a time when some of our stakeholders would have asked, why are we involved in such a program? Why is it a flagship? But we're involved in the business of development, we're involved in the business of government, and we're involved in the business of capital development. And we cannot see capital development as starting at a point of adulthood only.
Right.
And if the work that we do and the service of governments is directed towards the alleviation of poverty and the ill effects of poverty, then we feel that we need to be involved in that level of development.
Do you think that there is almost a re-education that is going to occur through the impact of this Roving Caregivers Program to have our governments, which are mostly male dominant in terms of leadership, appreciate the impact of child development on national development and productivity?
I think most definitely there has to be a certain level of education,
Yes.
A certain level of influence in policy that will be absolutely necessary. And given the concern for crime in the region,
Yes.
it would be very difficult to see how a government could not conceive this as part of their long-term strategy for stemming crime in the region.
Right. And so, therefore, you are seeing this as a program that is likely to receive support not just from CARICOM, but from other development agencies regionally.
and beyond that to the private sector who have an interest and a concern about the quality of citizens that we would be putting out. The issues of concern about self-esteem of children and attempting to have interventions almost when children are in secondary schools on self-esteem when we could start at such an early age, you know.
And we already see the paltry results that that has produced. And so Patricia McPherson, again, being in the core role, responsibility of education in CARICOM, how will you see the public sector driving this?
I think in terms of, as we mentioned before, when we think about the evidence that such a study has brought to the fore, it substantiates what literature has already said. You mentioned the fact that children tend to, once children are stimulated early, the attrition rate is lowered. We talked about the impact of crime and violence on children, the whole aspect of early stimulation in terms of their cognitive development. Children tend to stay in school a lot longer. So in that sense, one cannot but see where governments have to be responsive to this whole aspect of early childhood education.
I want to talk a little bit to Judith Alpucci about the sustainability and the need then for not just public sector government direction and investment, but also at a broader base, the participation of the private sector. Has this happened in Belize, and how do you see that happening regionally?
We have not really tapped into private sector, but I certainly think that on a whole, with this social program or any social program, it has to be a collective responsibility. I do believe, and we've articulated very well, the short-term, long-term, medium-term benefits of ECD, of early childhood development. And so I think because it is such a fundamental investment in your human capital, that government has to take on the primary responsibility, absolutely. It does not necessarily mean that government has to provide the services directly, but certainly to create the enabling environment or the frameworks or the encouragement for corporate social responsibility for public, for private sector entities to latch on to this. More and more in the region, we're seeing that those band-aid solutions, more police, more, don't work.
Absolutely.
And we have to invest in the long term. And we have to start from very early. So I think whereas, you know, crime and violence issues and all those social ills are an issue, and we have to deal with those head on because, as we say in Belize, while the grass grows, the heart to starve. Still, I think the argument, it is a good time to make the argument about the soundness of the investment and to bring forth that data that shows that it is far more cost effective to do these kind of prevention and basic foundation work rather than to invest in rehabilitation services later on down the line. It's twice or three times as expensive. So it's a good time.
I'm going to be a little bit of a troublemaker here and kind of suggest that our experience of humanity shows that it's not everything that is good and wise that we seek to move towards. And that even where we have data and impact studies and a proven track record, sometimes things don't get done to further enhance sustainability, availability, transferability. Are you intending to develop some kind of a lobby pressure group, some kind of an interest-based group to ensure? Because I'll be very frank with you, you're all women. And despite the fact that we talk about the glass ceiling and the shift, it really has not shifted substantially enough for the issues that pertain to women and child development to take enough of a front page in our policy making processes. How will you address that?
Can I respond to that question? I see that Susan is eager to respond to this. But I just want to say that child rearing is not only a female responsibility.
No, it isn't. You know? But the policy approach to it is what I'm talking about.
And
will they put the money?
Yes, you know, and as was well articulated from the very beginning in terms of the benefits that will accrue to society one cannot say that government will have a responsibility to ensure.
So you think
that
the
that takes
findings
place.
will be respected?
Yes, I do think so. And in addition, I think communities can participate in the learning. You know what is exciting, as Susan and Utilia talked about, the methodology in terms of how the roving caregivers program takes place, in the sense that the community participates. We can begin to let community take charge of that education that is there. Some communities may have retired persons, and we can utilize their skills in terms of retired teachers. We can develop communities and build capacities so that even as the rovers will recede, that parents and other communities, leaders in the communities, can take charge of that. So sometimes government may always say that it's not only centralized, but we can devolve and allow communities to take responsibility of those
Absolutely, but it's
programs.
the government that makes the investment.
I wanna
I'm
pick up
still
on-
punching that in.
I want to pick up on that point, because I do think that indeed the data stands, but indeed I think that we do have to do a little bit of advocacy and mobilize communities, mobilize parents, so that they can